So I am just 6 weeks out from the Valencia marathon, which is where I'm going for my next personal best attempt. I ran Berlin a few weeks ago, which went as to be expected after coming back from a bit of an injury, and since then my training has been looking good and I've been able to build back in some proper mileage, get some proper sessions done, and to be honest, I've not been this excited about where my training's been at in a long time. So in today's video I headed down to the Human Performance Unit in Colchester at the University of Essex for a bit of a lab test, basically to figure out where I'm at in terms of my training so far and look at maybe ways of tailoring my training in the coming weeks leading into Valencia to make it really specific to get the best out of my training. I started working with a coach, Victor, who is based in Sweden, and he is very keen on adapting this LT1 and LT2 training method that I'll talk through a little bit in today's video. It is quite complicated and there's lots of things to talk about, to analyze, to interpret, so I'll try my best to do that in today's video. But yeah, headed down to the Performance Lab in Colchester. This is something that I booked off my own back, but the guys at the Performance Lab very kindly offered to gift my test in exchange for a bit of content and a shout out on this YouTube video. So I've left a link to their website down below if you're looking to maybe get a test like this yourself. And the purpose of the test, as I said, was to figure out my VO2 max, which is that sexy number that everyone likes to sort of compare. Your running watch will give you a sort of rough estimate of what that is, and that's like the very top level of your performance, your sort of ceiling if you like, and also to figure out my lactate zones. And if you're completely new to the LT1 and LT2 talk, there's two lactate turn points. The first being our sort of aerobic threshold. This is when you sort of go from your zone 2 into sort of zone 3, the first sort of increase in intensity where you see an increase in lactate in the blood, and then you have your LT2, which is your anaerobic threshold. So this is the point at which your training goes from being aerobic into that anaerobic zone, and that's, to be honest, the most commonly used threshold that people will train to. So they're slightly different. LT1 is a lot lower intensity and is roughly around your marathon pace, and then you have LT2, which is a little bit higher intensity, which is somewhere around your 10k pace, but it obviously depends on the athlete and the training that you've put in for those events. So anyway, in today's video I thought it would be simple to just let the video play out in terms of my experience. I luckily had Liam with me when I went down to the lab and he filmed the whole procedure. The protocol at the University of Essex is 3-minute intervals, and then every 3 minutes they take a lactate sample from your ear, which roughly takes around 30 seconds, and then they increase the treadmill by 1.4 kilometers per hour, and then you start the next stage until you can't go anymore. So yeah, I think the test started for me at 12 kilometers an hour and worked all the way down to 23.2 if I remember rightly. So it went from sort of an easy pace all the way up to my very maximal speed that I could maintain on the treadmill before I had to jump off, and that's what they call to volatile exhaustion, exhaustion. Anyway, to basically you can't go anymore.
Alright, so first order of business is to go through a little bit of safety. So what I'd like you to do is put a foot either side of the belt for me and then a hand on each bar. Good. So this is the safety position. So if you hear me say safety position during the test, this will be what I'm referring to. Yeah. This is how we'll start the test. So you'll be in this position, I'll get the treadmill up to speed and I'll count you into the first stage. You'll jump on from here. More importantly than that though, this is also how I'd like to finish the test. So when you're working quite hard, it's still quite important to save enough energy to still be able to jump into that position. So we're going to do a warm up, quite an easy pace. We're going to start at, I made a note, sorry, at 12 kilometers per hour for stage 1. Going to go up by 1.4 every stage. So at the end of every stage, Charlotte is going to hold this in front of you, ask you how you're feeling, and you can just give us a number between 6 and 20. 6 being no exertion at all, I can do this all day. 20 being absolute limit of what I've got. Right. If I was to ask you right now at this test, whereabouts would you say you are? 7. Yeah, nice and light. Yeah. No, sorry. Alright, if you could grab hold please and just push that onto your face. You can give it a bit of a wriggle if you like to make sure it's comfortable around your nose and around your chin. And then I'm just going to come along and make some adjustments. Final reminder, 3-minute stages.
Yeah.
Every 3 minutes, the intensity is going to go up by around 1.4 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
But you get a 30-second respite between each of those.
Okay.
I'll be then taking a sample from your ear during that period, and I'll count you on to the next stage. Remember, Ben will push until you feel like you've had enough. So you're completely in control. Whenever you've had enough, whether that's in the middle of a stage or perhaps at the end of a stage, you can just let us know. I'm going to call it there.
Yeah.
And then I'll turn the treadmill off, we'll get the mask off and get you cooling down. Sound good?
Yeah, all good.
Is there anything I haven't made clear? Are you quite happy with?
Just in terms of call-outs, when will you tell me like how much time's been?
So usually I would do 1 minute into the stage, 1 minute out from the end, and then I might give you a 10-second heads up, and then I'll count you 3, 2, 1, safety position. And I'll try and keep that consistent if I can.
Yeah, no problem.
That sound good?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, ready to go then? You ready, Charlotte? So we'll start the test in 3, 2, 1. On the go. Okay. Feel okay then?
Yeah.
Let's start then. And then, so we're back on in 3, 2, 1. Next stage. Excellent. Then, it's a minute down in this stage. 4, 3, 2, 1. Same position. Good work. So 14.8 km per hour. Stage 3. Ben, 1 minute into this stage. Good work, Ben. 1 minute left in this stage. Good work, Ben. Well done. Find that rhythm again. Very good, Ben. Same position. Well done.
Great stuff, man.
Really good.
Great stuff, man. Well done.
So before the test really ramps up and it gets to those high intensities, I just want to thank the sponsors of this YouTube series in the build up to Valencia Marathon, and that is Soar Running. I'm very excited to again wear their elite marathon system come race day, and I expect I'll be training plenty of miles in their training apparel in the next few weeks. Now the kit I'm actually wearing in today's video is what I wore for the Copenhagen Marathon back in 2022. So it's testament to the quality of the apparel. It's been through the wash maybe 50, 60 times since I've had it in the last 2.5 years, and it's still going strong. The material is very thin, very, very breathable, and as I said, of the highest quality, which for me reflects that price point. If you'd like to shop anything at Soar Running, then please do so via the link in the description.
Ben, one time. 3, 2, 1. Same position. Good, Ben. Really good. 6, 7. Really nice, Ben. Every second counts now. It's all about you. 1 minute to go in this stage.
Great stuff, man. Well done. Fantastic, Ben. Well done. Settle into it.
Really getting after it, Ben. This is so good. One, safe position. Nice, Ben. Well done.
Fantastic work, Ben. Well done.
Good, Ben. Really good. Down into the new intensity. Really nice, Ben. And jump there. Well done, Ben. Nice deep pressure there. Well done. I'll get one more from your ear, then I'll leave it alone.
Well done.
Thank you.
Doing okay?
Yeah.
Well done.
I don't think I'll hit that pace in about probably 12 weeks to be fair.
Yeah, that's good. As you might expect, we're effectively just looking at, as exercise intensity increases, what's happening internally. So from a physiological perspective, as the intensity increases, oxygen demand goes up to generate energy, right?
Yeah.
So these blue dots are oxygen uptake. So you can see when you're working quite light, not very much is being used, and then as the intensity starts to increase, we're seeing it follow a nice linear pattern. So on the new stage, more oxygen is going to be required, therefore we see this pattern. You'll notice that throughout, up to a point perhaps around here, where we start to see these blue dots stop following that pattern and start to plateau a little bit.
Yeah.
That would be a great indication for us that we're working in and around VO2 max. So where VO2 max is a theoretical maximum, a bit like a ceiling, in theory there should be no more. So what we'd expect to see is that we'll follow a nice upwards pattern each stage until we reach around VO2 max intensity, where now the blue dots are not going to be jumping up quite as much. They'll stay nice and plateaued and flat. The opposite's true then for carbon dioxide, which is the red dots. So as you start to work really hard, we can see that the red dots and the blue dots switch over. So now you're breathing out significantly more carbon dioxide in your sort of kind of the air you're breathing, and ultimately that's because we're now buffering all that lactate. All of those waste products that are being produced from energy creation now need to go somewhere. So this is where we'll start to see these red dots start to really skyrocket. We've done a fantastic job, because you can see VO2 max is probably occurring somewhere around here, and you were still able to get a good portion of the next stage done, even though you were already at VO2 max, which is great. So effectively great for maximal aerobic speed, so that's a really good sign. Also, the fact it looks like this gives us really good confidence in the data down this end as well, which is arguably more important than VO2 max, because this is kind of race paces, so more relevant to you and marathons and your training. VO2 max being a great bragging rights number, I suppose, but from the training perspective, the values down here are much more interesting. As you start to settle into the intensity in steady state, we'll start to perhaps see some of these flush downwards. So the curve will kind of look like that. So it starts coming down, starts to climb up again. So 1.25 at 17.6 k's per hour. 1.8, so that's very close to LT1 there at about 19. So we know that LT1 is going to fall somewhere between 19 and 20.4. Then usually after that first lactate threshold, that first inflection point, that's where you start to get quite a rapid spike. So that's why it jumps up quite significantly to 3.18, then to 5.16. So LT2 somewhere between 20.4 and 21.8, and then final lactate was about 7.2.
Still relatively low to how it felt. I would have guessed it would have been at least 10.
A lot higher, of course.
No, really interesting.
But great data. We won't know too much about thresholds until we do a little bit of analysis that we'll do next. But all of that will be in your report anyway. Like I say, any questions you can always get in touch.
Thank you very much.
No worries at all. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you in, Ben.
So roughly around 5 to 7 days after the test, at the University of Essex, they send you out a laboratory treadmill test report, which goes through all of your data. So I'll quickly go through it in today's video. Based on their report, I'll then talk a little bit about what my coach thought of the testing in terms of how he plans to tailor my training in the build up to Valencia. So the first thing was your stage by stage results. Down this column we've got the running speeds, so it started at 12 as I said and worked all the way down to 23.2. Now I didn't actually complete that stage, I got off the treadmill after around roughly 90 seconds, so halfway through that interval. So my last sort of complete stage was stage 8, which was 21.8 kilometers per hour. It tells you your heart rate, your lactate concentration, which are the ones I wanted to sort of focus on a little bit in today's video because they're what I personally use in my training. And you may see me take my own lactate samples whilst I'm on the treadmill, whilst I'm doing sessions down at the track. And it's basically to check that I'm in the right zone so that the training that I've been set is going to get the right adaptation, from the training I'm doing. If it's too low, then I might want to increase the pace a little bit. If it's too high, then I might have overcooked the session, or I might need to revise some of the paces the next time I do it. So first of all, let's talk through my blood lactate concentration. So at stage 1, it was 0.93, so that's my sort of resting lactate. This can be influenced by how soon you had your last meal, heat, and lots of other factors. So it's important to take your sort of resting lactate on the day, because that can fluctuate a little bit. So here we have a number of 0.93, which is as to be expected. And then after stage 2, it had gone down to 0.71. Then on stage 3, 0.77, and then stage 4, 0.91. So all those stages up to stage 4, it's still fairly constant. My lactate hasn't really changed there from the resting. It's gone down a little bit, but that's natural. Then here between stage 4 and stage 5, I would say is the first time my blood lactate concentration shows an increase, going from 0.91 to 1.25. So the way my coach defines your LT1 is the first sort of increase in blood lactate concentration in your blood. So for me, that tells me, based on how I train and my coach's training philosophy, if you like, my LT1 is going to be sitting somewhere between 16.2 kilometers an hour and 17.6 kilometers an hour, which is roughly, I think, around 330 per kilometer. So that's based on his definition. The way the testing is done at the University of Essex, they use 2 millimole and 4 millimole, which is sort of like a baseline model for data analysis that lots of people use. It's very, very common that if you took, say, for example, a sample of 100 people, most people's LT1 would be a concentration of around 2 millimoles of lactate in the blood, and then 4 millimole is your LT2, and that's how the performance lab here analyze the data based off that model. So there's slightly different methods of interpretation. So yeah, that's the first sort of increase in blood lactate for me, came at stage 4 to 5. At stage 6 it's 1.8, so it's a little bit higher than at stage 5. And then between stage 6 and stage 7 you see a real fast increase from 1.8 to 3.18. So according to, again, my coach's sort of data analysis, this is where my LT2 is likely to sit, somewhere between sort of the 19 kilometers an hour and 20 kilometers an hour, based on the testing that I did. And then, as you can see, as the intensity increases, my blood lactate also increases, so it goes all the way up to 7.2, which, to be honest with you, isn't that high. I think it's because the testing we did was only 3-minute increments. I think if those stages were a little bit longer, that blood lactate would have kept going up. So once you go above your body's ability to fulfill the demand for oxygen, you go anaerobic, and this blood lactate will go up and up and up and up until complete exhaustion. So I hit a number of 7.22, which is relatively low, but I'd expect if those stages were a little bit longer, that would have gone up to 10, maybe 12, 13, 14, based on sort of testing I've done before. So yeah, that's my blood lactate. As you can see, some very clean data. There's a clear trend there. You can see the first increase between stage 4 and stage 5. And then around stage 6, 7 and 8, you can clearly see quite a rapid increase as my body moves to burning more carbohydrate than it does fat. And yeah, the heart rate sort of correlates to that as well. Starting at 128, going all the way up to 186. The last stage, it only went up to 182, or average 182, but that's because I didn't complete that stage. So the average was just taken over that 90-second period rather than the 3 minutes. So yeah, the last stage 9 you can kind of just ignore a little bit in terms of heart rate data, and I think the highest I recorded on the day was 190, and in the past I think my highest ever heart rate that I've recorded is 194. A few other little bits of data that the testing will provide. We've got your relative oxygen uptake, so this is your VO2 max. My VO2 max, we'll go on to just a second, was 66.4 millimoles per kilogram of body weight every minute, which according to this relative VO2 scale is somewhere between the very top level of a well-trained athlete and just creeping into that sort of elite level, which is basically where I would describe myself. I'm a well-trained individual, but not quite in the elite category just yet. Hopefully in the next few years I can build it up. Relative oxygen uptake, as you can see, that increases as the speed increases. So I'm basically using more oxygen as the test goes on, as the intensity increased. The respiratory exchange ratio basically is the ratio between oxygen and carbon dioxide that's being measured via the face mask that I'm wearing. So what the data here suggests that at slower paces, I'm utilizing carbohydrates a lot more. And then as the speed increases, I start to use carbohydrates more. And then finally, you have your running economy, which is the proportion of work completed for the energy expended. This value measures the amount of oxygen needed to run at certain paces / intensity and is expressed as millimole per kilogram per kilometer. Roughly, an elite runner will have a running economy of around 180 or below. Somebody who's well trained or a good level of running economy will be around 200, and the average person will have, I don't know, 220, 240, maybe worse. So basically from this data you can work out which paces I was most efficient at. So at my easy pace, I have a running economy of 192, which would be considered good. Roughly, if we look here between stage 4 and stage 5, my running economy is around 185, which is close to where my marathon pace is. But interestingly, my most efficient stage was at 21.8 kilometers an hour. So yeah, faster than my 5k pace. During those strides is when I'm most efficient, which again is kind of to be expected. But here we can sort of look at the data and say I'm least efficient at 14.8 kilometers an hour. So maybe there's something we can work on there in my training. Maybe a bit more training at that intensity would lead to an improvement in efficiency. And yeah, that's basically all the data from the stages table. Very, very interesting. And I think the main thing I took away was how clean the data set was. Very, very accurate. You can see the trends. There's no anomalies, which is a very good sign. So we talked about my VO2 max, 66.4, which is, yeah, it's good. It's not incredible, but I think my running economy is fairly good. So I sort of make up for my lack of VO2 max with my fairly decent running economy. But maybe that's something also we could look to increase, especially if I was, say, targeting more shorter distances, more the 1500 meters and the 5k. It's more important to have that VO2 max a little bit higher, I'd say. But for marathon running, it's not really too important. What you want to improve is your sort of LT1 and LT2, the ability to sort of maintain those paces for a long period of time. So yeah, 66.4. It says here elite male runners have a VO2 max of 66.6. So I'm only 0.2 off. And world-class athletes, your Eliud Kipchoge's, have anywhere around 75 VO2 max scores. So yeah, some interesting data there. We also got my absolute peak oxygen uptake, so that was 4.1 litres. Again, I don't know what that really means, but it's something we can compare in future tests. And my maximal aerobic speed was 22.7 kilometers per hour. So after that, I went anaerobic, and I would have been producing more carbon dioxide than I was taking in oxygen, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's quite complicated. I hope I explained that as best I could. As I said, I'm not an expert myself. I'm sure there's people out there that are much more qualified to talk about these things than me, but it's nice to share my experience as well. And then moving on to your performance indicators, these are your lactate threshold 1. As I said, this is the maximum intensity that can be maintained for an extended time with little or no increase of lactate in the blood. And in theory, it's roughly around 2 millimoles based on sort of the average, and you should be able to maintain that for around 2 hours plus in duration. So yeah, as I said, roughly around marathon pace. And then anaerobic threshold is the intensity at which lactate begins to accumulate in the blood faster than it can be removed. So as I was saying, the point of no return, and this is roughly around 4 millimoles. So that's a very sort of generic way of measuring lactate, but based off that, the lactate threshold they identified was 3.07 per kilometer, and my anaerobic threshold was 252, which I've spoken to my coach about. These are very, very generous sets of data, and as I said, because It's based on sort of a generic analysis of 2 millimole and 4 millimole. It's not necessarily too specific to me. As much as I'd love to say my anaerobic threshold is 252, I certainly wouldn't be able to maintain that for very long in a race. So I know personally from experience that these numbers are possibly a little bit generous. And yeah, this is the last piece of information they provide, which is your key performance indicators. So here they've put on the graph my lactate threshold 1, or the point where I had reached 2 millimoles in the test, which was here around 19 kilometers per hour, and my LT2 when I reached 4 millimoles was around 21. So yeah, key performance indicators, these are my training zones. And this is probably where I find the most value from the test, is figuring out where your zones sort of lay. I think it's important to remember that with your lactate thresholds, they're not one specific speed. It can vary on the day based on how fatigued you are, based on even the rep length. For example, if I'm doing 1 minute intervals on the track, my LT1 pace may be 3:07, whereas when I'm doing sort of a 15-minute tempo effort, my LT1 can be closer to 3:31. So here, this table basically suggests my zones. So I've got zone 1 is identified as recovery. Zone 2 is my endurance, which is where that LT1 sits. My threshold, which is for my sort of high intensity intervals in my training, and then anaerobic, which is suggesting any pace faster than 2:46 per kilometer is my anaerobic. So those sprints, those sort of VO2 max sessions that I probably won't doing too much of over the next few months in marathon training. But the most interesting thing for me is they've sort of given a range here, which I think is a little bit more accurate of where my LT1 sits, somewhere between 3:31 and 3:07 per kilometer, based off how I sort of identify my LT1 with my coach. As I was suggesting, that first point of increase, the data suggested that 3:31 is probably a lot closer to where my LT1 is than 3:07. That's a little bit too high based off how my coach analyzes the data. And yeah, my anaerobic threshold, that LT2, is roughly around 3:06 per kilometer, which roughly is around about my 10k pace, so probably about right. The main thing I take away from this test is that the real sort of benefit of getting these tests done is that you can compare it to your previous data set. Everywhere you go is going to have their own sort of protocol. Here they did 3-minute intervals. I know some other places do slightly longer intervals with shorter rests, longer rests. So it's important to find a place that you can do this locally to you, and maybe do these tests sort of every 4 to 6 months, so you can see your progress and track your progress basically. And I think that's where the real value will come for me as a runner. For more recreational runners, is to be able to track their progress compared to their previous results. So yeah, some really interesting data sets there that my coach is going to really take a deep dive into in the next few weeks, and I'll be able to tailor my training really specifically when it comes to knowing the paces I want to hit. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you again soon with another training video in the build up to Valencia. But until next time, aspire to run, run to inspire, and we'll see you again soon.